Okay, it is now 8 o'clock. I will call the meeting of the WISD Board of Trustees to order. Please let the record show that all 7 trustees are in attendance and that this meeting has been duly called and the notice of the meeting has been duly posted for time and manner required by law. First item on our agenda will be our closed session. So at this point, we will be into closed session according to section 551.001 et sec of the Texas Government Code. It is now 8 a.m. And we will go in the other room so you guys don't have to leave. is now 8:40. We're going to reconvene back into open session. First item will be our open forum. I don't believe we have anyone signed up to speak this morning, so we will move right into our human resources. Ms. James, the consideration and to approve the personnel report as recommended by the superintendent that include employment, retirement, resignation, position changes, and potential additional positions.
Okay, good morning, Board. I would like to ask that you approve the personnel report as recommended by the superintendent in closed session.
Motion by Mr. Schofield. Second. Second by Mr. McCutcheon. Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion carries 7-0. Thank you very much, Ms. Sharon.
Thank you.
Okay, next item will be our board workshop portion. Item A will be discussion of the 2020-2021 budget. Board, just for a little clarification, that's what this meeting was really just supposed to be about, was just a little budget workshop. I was having a conversation with Mr. Calden, and I think all parties involved realize that we're fixing to have some difficult decisions to be made over the next probably 2, 3, possibly even 4 budget cycles, and we just wanted to kind of bring everybody up to speed on where we're at and where we're going, and just so everyone's involved in the process.
And Mr. President, administration will be asking for at least one more meeting, one to approve our reopening plan, and my little red light's on. Oh, he's giving me the thumbs up. Oh, okay. Maybe it's got to warm up. Okay. Two things. One, we will need the reopening plan approved by the board. We didn't want to ask you today because I know the board wants to edit it and ask questions about it, and so I thought it would be a little disingenuous for us to hand it to you and then ask you to approve it. And the calendar. Now that we have the new UIL calendar, this means homecoming, the fair, all those things that have changed by the state, we need to look at our calendar for those minor changes for the board to consider. So we'll be bringing that. And so I will be asking before this meeting's over if we can schedule another workshop before school starts.
All right, Mr. Calden.
Thanks, sir. Morning, board. Nothing like talking about budget at 8:45 in the morning, but we'll give it our best. We'll start with a quick overview of our budget process, just so that we're all on the same page. Generally, the budget starts in January or February. That's when we really start looking at expectations for the next year. We start looking at expected student enrollment, demographic reports, and we get with our campuses and departments and we start talking about needs. We talk about what their current funding levels are, what they're not able to do with their current funding levels, what more they need, special allocations and requests. We get with cabinet and superintendent and start talking about what are our priorities and goals for the next year so that we can try to prioritize things within the budget for the next school year. This year, we had a fun little interruption of COVID right there in March, so that kind of threw really everything into a different orbit this year. It's really complicated trying to figure out what your plan is going to be for next year when it keeps changing, and so, but we'll get to that here in just a minute. Generally, we hold additional board meetings in June, July, and August to update you on the budget and make sure that any priorities that you have that we've missed, that we incorporate those in there, and that we have a general idea and understanding amongst all of us what we're looking at for next year and where we're going. Then we will prepare a summary, a budget book that will be distributed to you in August. Typically, that's the last week of July that we get it to you. I was planning on being at Disney World the last week of July. We've now canceled that, but we've pushed the budget book back a week to accommodate for that. And then almost always there's a called meeting somewhere around the 31st of August so that we can amend the current year budget, and that's mainly for first report reasons, and then adopt the next year budget and the tax rate. We have to do that legally before we get into the next fiscal year. So we try to put that as late as we can just so that there's as much time to ask questions, answer questions, make adjustments if we need to before we get to adopting that budget. And then we want the current year budget to be as close to accurate and adjusted as possible at the very end of the year. So there were some changes to our budget process this year, not all related to COVID. House Bill 3 did a really good job of adjusting how we do our budgets. And last year was the first year of the biennium for House Bill 3. You remember that last year, House Bill 3 required some property tax reduction for taxpayers. And so going into last year, we knew that we were going to have our tax rate cut for us due to the legislature. And that's fine. That's easy. We know up front what it's going to be. We're able to do that, no big deal. In addition to, House Bill 3 required capped revenue for property taxes from local, so capped local revenues from property taxes at only 2.5% growth every year. If you've seen the growth here in Ellis County, Waxahachie specific, you would see additions to property values roughly in that 10% range from new additions. You would see overall gains of roughly 15%. So there's a lot of new value going in, but our revenue from property taxes are now capped at 2.5% over what they are this year. We've also moved from a 1-year lag in property values used for state funding purposes to current property values. The issue that you run into there is current property values are not going to be attested by the appraisal district until the 20th or 25th of July. So we still don't know that number at this point. We have a guess. We know generally what it should be, but we don't have that number. When we get that number, we have to send it to TEA, and they tell us what our tax rate can be, what our maximum tax rate can be. Their TEA is supposed to have that done by August 5th. We'll see, we hope. From there, then we can go through adopting budgets, adopting tax rates. But that is one key component. M&O property taxes make up about 98% of local revenue. That's one key component that we still don't know at this point. And here we are 6 weeks before the start of the next fiscal year. So it's presenting a little bit of a challenge as compared to previous years where you always knew what last year's property values were to develop your budget. Then throw in COVID pandemic in addition. So the spring version of COVID pandemic where we're out and we're trying to do distance learning and buy new devices and all that fun stuff to the uncertainty of what the fall is really going to look like. When are we starting school? Is how many people are going to be doing it virtually? How many are going to be doing it in person? What capabilities do we need? So COVID is throwing a real curveball into all of our planning for next year. And then we're also looking at starting school a little bit earlier than we've done in years past. It's not a bad thing. It's just something that we need to consider. Campuses will not have the new budget money until September. So when they start on the 13th, that's going to add them an extra week of making do with what they have on campus before the new budget opens. All that to say, it's not insurmountable. It's just something we need to consider as we go into it. So here's some possible challenges that we have for next year. Again, COVID. I know that I'm kind of tired of blaming anything on COVID, but that's the reality of the scenario that we're in. COVID is causing us a curve. So when I say student enrollment, how many students are going to be enrolled? We need to also remember that some students that enroll with us this year, we're not going to get funding for. If they came from homeschool or a private school, we don't get funding for them this year. That's TEA has said it, and that's the way it's going to be. If they come from a charter school or another ISD, we can get funding for. We can enroll them and get funding for them for the year. Attendance, what's attendance going to be like? Generally, it's in that 96, 97% range across the district. This year, I don't know that it's a safe bet that it's going to stay in that 96, 97% range. Days and minutes of instruction, how is that going to look when we may have outbreaks? We know we're going to have outbreaks. We know we're going to have closures. How are we going to ensure we get the days and the minutes? We have a plan. We hope it comes to fruition for the full course of the year. With our protocols, we have additional cleaning and additional PPE requirements. We know we're getting some stuff from the state in terms of gloves and masks and shields and hand sanitizer, but at some point that's going to run out. And so there's going to be a bigger demand to buy those kind of materials, not just from our district, but everybody else is going to be buying them. So what's the availability? What's the price going to be on those kind of things? All those are factors and considerations that we need to put into for the budget. President Autry and I were talking a couple of weeks ago, and he made some really good points about revenues. You know, we have a general idea of what our revenues are going to be, but COVID-19 has had a real impact on unemployment rate. That's gone from 3% to 13%. So property taxes, are all taxpayers going to be able to pay their property taxes on time and in the manner that we need them to pay? Generally, Property taxes, we don't like carrying them on the books as a receivable because that doesn't help pay salaries and bills and all that fun stuff. So property taxes, are we going to get the revenue that we need and are expecting? Athletic revenues, with the changes that UIL is putting in, will we have spectators in the stands for athletic events? Will some athletic events even happen? Athletics generally hits the budget in terms of revenue to the tune of about $250,000, $300,000 a year. Not telling you that that's going to be a zero, but that is some money that's now in question at this point because we don't really know what athletic events are going to look like. Investment earnings, that was a subtle shot to say that that's pretty much going to be zero. I mean, the investment rate right now is just absolutely terrible. And as to where we have been used to earning a decent return, 1-2% on our $20 million that we have in the bank, that's probably going to be pretty close to zero for the year. So that's going to be another hit to our budget for next year. And then staffing levels. We talked originally about enrollment and all that fun stuff, but we still have teachers that have contracts that we are planning on a certain number. If it's something less, we may be overstaffed. If it's something more, we may have to go out and get more staff as we go throughout the year. But there are some restrictive staffing levels that it's just fair conversation that we all talk about. These are straight from the 2018, 2019 taper reports. So these are online. You can get them from TEA. They don't have 1920 out yet. 18-19 taper reports. If you look at the total number of students to total staff that we have in the district, our ratio is for every 6.9 students, we have a staff member. If you look at the state average, it's 7.5. So that yields us about 100 extra staff members than the state average. This calculation's a little bit misleading, and I'll tell you why. Not every district has the same departments internal. So Ennis and Midlothian, just off the top of my head, they outsource their child nutrition department. Outsourcing child nutrition will completely adjust that number. Midlothian is looking at an 8:1 or an 8:2 ratio, same with Ennis. The reason they get there is they don't have 90 employees in child nutrition like we do. They've outsourced theirs to somebody else, so that doesn't count against the ratio. So I'm not a huge fan of the student-staff ratio. I thought I'd put it on here anyway because it is an easy one to calculate. The one that I like to go to is the student-teacher ratio. And we're the only ones that have teachers. We're not outsourcing teachers to anybody else. You look at our number of students per teacher, we're at about 13.9 district-wide. The state average is 15.1, which would yield roughly 50 additional teaching positions that we have that lowers our average to the state average. You look at other districts around us, Red Oak is 15.4, Midlothian 16.4. Some of these are going to be made up by student demographics and student makeup. Some of these are going to be attributed to staffing decisions and staffing levels. Just a general idea of the fiscal effect of these two ratios. Student staff ratio to get to the 7.5 students to total staff that the state has. The 107 staff members, if we took an average of $40,000, which would be a salary across the entire district, you're looking at roughly $4.3 million that would be saved by not having those additional 107 positions. When we look at the student-teacher ratio to go to the state average of 15:1, removing those 50 extra teaching staff positions at a average salary of $65,000 would be about $3.2 million. With the staffing levels that we currently have, those are extra expenditures that are going to be in this budget and every budget going forward, as long as those ratios are holding true. So it's not necessarily a good or a bad, it's just a informative piece so that we're all on the same page. Yes, sir.
You may have hit on this already. Is there something about WISD that requires, like, as our SPED population greater, that would require more teachers per student?
I'm glad that you brought that up. I did not put it in here, but yes, when you look at our identified SPED students compared to total student population and compare that with other districts in the state, our percent of identified students is higher. In some cases, significantly higher. We're about 13% Other districts our size, roughly 10% or a little less, and the state average is roughly 10% or a little less. So yes, when you have more students identified for services, that doesn't mean that we're improperly identifying them or that we are withholding services from anybody. But when you have more students, generally these SPED classrooms, these specialized classrooms, have a smaller student-teacher ratio than your general classrooms. So you may have a life skills classroom, it's not going to have a 22-to-1 ratio in the life skills room. If you have a behavior unit, it's not going to have 22 or 28 or 30-to-1 ratio in that room. It's going to be a whole lot smaller. So that would also drive some of these staffing variants as well. Another component that drives into this is our campus sizes. We've had conversations in the past about what is the ideal campus size. When you look at our current elementaries, we generally hold to a model of about a functional capacity of 550 students. If we were to move that functional capacity closer to Wedgeworth size, about 800 students, then you would need 3 physical campuses less than we currently have. 3 physical campuses, in addition to the savings that you would have on the physical building, the maintenance, the upkeep, the utilities, you would also have redundant staff that would be in that. You'd need 1 principal per building, not 4 principals for that same building. You would reduce some nursing, some counseling, some assistant principals. With all those, and maintenance staff, child nutrition staff, the list goes on, and you gain some efficiencies with teachers as well. Instead of having a bunch of classrooms at 18, you have classrooms closer to 20. You can actually reduce a section. Mr. Avenshine has a great example on it that I don't want to steal his thunder. We can get into it at a later time, but he has a really great example about 140 students in one grade level at one campus is 7 teachers, but over 2 campuses is 8 teachers. It just simply shows 70 in each grade level is 4 teachers per campus instead of, if they were combined, that's 8 at 2 campuses, 7 at 1. Just goes to show the efficiencies of having a little bit larger campus size. Redundant staff, a quick and dirty review of it would be about $2.3 million, and then I did not bust out a pencil to try to figure out what maintenance cost would be for 3 additional facilities. And then we also have class size restrictions at the secondary level. There was a typo in the handout that you originally received. It said not to exceed 28 in class instead of 28-to-1 for a campus. That should have said 30-to-1 on a campus. Right now at a secondary level, the guess is by numbers that there's about 12 additional staff members, which is about $750,000. Not that it's a bad policy, not that we shouldn't have smaller class sizes. It's just here's the fiscal effect of that standard that we have as a district. Give you some information on enrollment in ADA. On the left chart, the number that it gets thrown about is the line chart. That is the enrollment for the district, and that's generally at snapshot day at the end of October. The numbers that I like to look at are the gray column. That's the preliminary ADA. That's what we are expecting our ADA to be for the year. That's how we get our funding from the state. Except for 17-18, you will see a trend that actually, I believe, works in the best interest of the district to have a lower ADA that we are budgeting for and a higher full year ADA that we actually earn and receive funding on. It's a whole lot easier for us to add additional funds to the budget in June and July than it is to try to get rid of people in June and July to balance the budget. We intentionally are conservative when we budget. We intentionally budget our preliminary ADA a little bit less than what the demographer says, and we also take attendance at about 95% instead of 97%, which is where the district generally averages. 17-18, I missed it, and our full year ADA was a little bit less than the preliminary. And then 19-20, you'll see a big spike in full year ADA. That is generally due to TEA's policies that they came up with in the spring of saying we are going to go back and look at last year's ADA and apply that forward for the 5th and 6th weeks for this year. I don't have any other real good explanation to it other than that really helped us out because we weren't physically taking attendance for students in 5th and 6th weeks. We were relying on averages from previous years. On the right, you'll see a comparison between the enrollment number and the ending ADA as a percent of enrollment. Roughly 94, 95% every year. That's kind of what we would expect. That goes to kind of show you that's not an attendance percent, because not all of our students are funded at 100%. Pre-K gets funded at half. They get half an ADA funding for a pre-K student. So it's not an attendance percent. The attendance is going to be higher than that. That's just of our end of year ADA, what it is as compared to our enrollment. It meets our expectations, 94, 95. Then you see the 2019-20 effect from TEA with COVID. Local revenues, we talked a little bit earlier about property taxes. Again, they make up about 98% of our local revenues for the district annually. Property taxes, athletic revenues, and investment earnings are all in yellow because those are the ones that I have a little bit of caution going into next year, just again, based off where we are. Tuition and fees is not a significant driver. We do get some money from other districts that pay to send their kids to us. It's not significant in the overall grand scheme of things. And then other miscellaneous revenue, that's anything from insurance recoveries to sale of land to any other miscellaneous things that we don't really plan on an annual basis. Some of these things happen and some of them don't, but that's not a driving factor when we go in and try to determine staffing levels and personnel. Showing you a chart of property tax in the millions in the state budget, or in our, local budget. The reason 1920 is in green is that's the House Bill 3. So you see these significant increases annually. That's in the gray bars. That's before House Bill 3. We would see the effect of 15, 8, 9, 10% property value growth. That would lead to additional property tax revenue on that end. With House Bill 3 going forward from 1920 forward, you should see a real small increase of roughly 2.5%. That's going to be the increase every year, regardless of what property value growth is. That increase in property tax revenue is going to be limited to 2.5%.
Okay, what am I missing? Where does the surplus go?
So the way it's calculated is we have to lower our tax rate. For all of the new additions, we keep lowering our rate to only hit 2.5%. There is, now, Mr. Rogers, you may be more aware of it at the city level. The city has a cap also, but their cap is old value or existing value, shouldn't call it old, existing value times 2.5% plus new value. Our calculator is all value times 2.5%. So in a way, and this may be my twisted way of looking at it, but in a way, the new values that are being brought online are not really paying 100% of their fair share, because their old value was 0, and they're getting the benefit of a lower new value, as to where your existing home went from this value up here down to here. The new value is, or the new house is coming in down here. They're not seeing any reduction. Their reduction is kind of artificial in the rate that they're paying. That may be a twisted way of looking at it, but that's, yeah. What's a twisted view amongst friends? All right, state revenues. The other side of House Bill 3 was increases in the basic allotment for students. So the gray bar in this one is state revenue. You'll see that it trods along at roughly the same level, which is good and bad. We had great student growth during those years, but because of the increase in local revenue, the way the funding formula worked, more local revenue meant less state revenue. The only way you could increase your state revenue was additional enrollment. We had enough additional enrollment to kind of keep that gray bar level, and then you get to 1920, and that gray bar jumps up. And that's due to the state going from $5,000 per student to $6,000 per student. So we were enriched from the state with state revenues with House Bill 3. That got us back to a roughly 50-50 split between local revenue and state revenue. Before House Bill 3, it was closer to 60-40. Local revenue 60%, state revenue 40%. I'm not really sure why I put the ADA line on there, other than to show you it was increasing, which kind of mirrors that state revenue line. And then I stacked the local revenue on top of it just so that you could see the overall revenue effect. There's really not much federal revenue to speak of. It's insignificant in the overall scope of the general fund. But you can see that our revenue went from roughly $65 million in 15-16 to about $92 million in 19-20. So that's a pretty significant jump in a 5-year span. We need to have a property value discussion. This is for the first report more than anything else, but let's talk about where we are with property values. FAT values, those are the freeze-adjusted taxable values. That doesn't fit very nicely on the graph, so it got shortened to FAT. And then the new values. We were talking a little bit ago about the new values, and so you can see there's a significant jump. Starting in 2018, there's been a significant continual jump in new values over where it was previously. These are new houses being built, new commercial development. We were about 137 million in 2017, and that jumped to 234 million in 2018, and it stayed there or higher since then. So you all know Waxahachie is growing. You all know that the district is growing. We're seeing more students. This is just a visual representation of that growth. You're seeing a significant, roughly 50% increase in the valuation growth since 2017, and that's been consistent 18, 19, and 2020. You see the freeze-adjusted taxable values underneath it. Those also have continued to grow, and that is more of a component of valuation growth, and some of it has to do with new values being added, but most of that is valuation growth that's going into that. Our current freeze-adjusted taxable values, our guesstimate for the 2021 fiscal year is right at $5 billion. So that's $5 billion, and it has grown significantly. It was under $4 billion back in 2016 when I got here. It was about $3 billion. So that's a pretty significant growth in a 5-year period. And then I isolated just new value increase as a percent over there on that right chart. You see that since 2016, our new values have added to the roll roughly 9% or more every single year. So that's another strong indicator of the growth that we're seeing here in the district. This year, the guess is right at 15.5 or 15 or so percent, which is down just a little bit from last year of 16%, but that is still significant growth that the district is seeing with valuations. We'll talk a little bit about the total tax rate. If you'll remember, back in 2014, 2015, we did a tax ratification election. At that point, we increased the M&O tax rate from $1.04 to $1.17. It stayed at that level until House Bill 3 came along in 2019 and required compression. And so the tax rate went from $1.17 to $1.06. My current, with our growth for next year, property value growth, my current estimate of M&O tax rate is going to be 97.5 cents. So that's almost a 20-cent reduction in the M&O tax rate over 2 years. I could be wrong on that. When we send our certified values into the state, if they come back higher than what the appraisal district has been estimating to this point, that number could actually be lower, and you may see a true 20-cent reduction in our M&O tax rate over the last 2 years. Our INS rate has held steady at 39 cents over the last 5 years. It was originally 25.89, and then it got up by 12.5 cents in 2015 when we did the high school project, along with the Finley, Turner, and Coleman renovations. But it's been consistent at the 0.3839 cents since that time. Total tax rate, I had this written down on one of my talking sheets. Total tax rate for next year is estimated to be $1.3589. And then in 2016, it was $1.5539. So again, you're seeing almost a 20-cent reduction in that total tax rate since the 2018 fiscal year. Additional budget considerations. So we talked a little bit, what's the effect of COVID-19 going to have? What are the shutdowns going to be? What are infections going to be? How much uncertainty is there going to be amongst parents about sending their students? How is that going to play on the economy at the state level? How is that going to play on our budget? Yesterday, the comptroller came out and said that the state deficit is estimated to be $4.5 billion for the next biennium. So that's a significant number. As we talked in June, school district funding makes up roughly 30-something% of the state budget. So any reduction in state budget for the next biennium really has to include some cuts to schools. There's not a real good way to make up $4.5 billion without something coming out of the education budget. I don't know what that's going to be. There really hasn't been a whole lot of talk about it at this point. One thing that we talked about previously was our emergency stabilization funds. And Ms. Kriegel had asked me a question before the meeting started about, are we going to get that money back, or is it still going to be held by TEA? And Ms. Kriegel, I looked it up while y'all were in closed session, and the guidance from TEA still says that they are keeping that money to shore up the state budget. They're keeping so just let me back up for just a second. The emergency stabilization money is essentially $800 million for Waxahachie ISD. What TEA has said is that they are going to keep that $800 million to shore up the foundation school program money. So they are saying that they're going to guarantee that our 2020-2021 state payments will continue in full as we would expect. The way they're going to do that is they're taking that additional federal money and they're keeping it to shore up the fund so that we can keep getting our state payments. So it was originally thought that we were going to get an extra $800 million to go in, no, $800,000. Sorry, not million. Wrong level. $800,000. We were going to get additional $1,000 to help us with COVID, help us with all the effects, help us shore up our budgets. Instead, the state has kept that to shore up their budget, and they're going to keep our state payments at 100% of what we have earned. So there's the trade-off. Our gain from the emergency stabilization money is going to really be 5%. That's for our private nonprofit set-asides that we have to service. So in all honesty, we will see very much nothing from that $800,000 going into next year. But we are thankful that we have been told at this point from TEA that we will receive full ADA funding for students. I guess that's the trade-off that we have to live with one way or the other. Yes, ma'am.
I know that there has been discussion at the state level that should be sent to the districts.
Yes, ma'am.
So anyway, I'll try to research. I just read way too many different things, so I'm not sure where I found it or saw it, but I'll find it and send it to you.
Very good. Thank you. We'll tell you that the state came out with an announcement this past week. So we submitted a connectivity survey that let the state know, hey, here's what we think. Within our district, we've done some polling. We've asked parents who needs a device, who needs connectivity. And we gathered that information. We sent it to the state. The state has now said that they're going to make $200 million available for districts to help with those connectivity issues. I don't really know how that's going to look at this point. That announcement came out on Friday. I don't know if it's going to be like the PPE, where they say, we've purchased this stuff on your behalf and we'll be sending it to you, or if they're going to be allocating out $200 million to districts to go out and buy materials. My guess is, because of the purchasing power of the state, they will probably purchase on our behalf and send it to us. Strictly a guess, though. There's nothing scientific about that guess. And then, as we talked earlier, considerations, the effect on local revenues from athletic revenues, investment income, and then even child nutrition revenues to shore up that fund. If students aren't here, they're probably not buying meals in the cafeteria, which may put some strain on that fund as well. And then economic impact for the next 2021-2022 legislative session. So in the budget information that I had sent you late last night, I am currently estimating a 5% reduction in state revenue. That's not because next year I expect a reduction in state revenue. It's for the following year. It's for that $4.5 billion that we're behind right now from what the comptroller originally estimated to where he said yesterday. That goes into the certified estimate of revenues available for appropriation for the 2021-2022 fiscal year on a state level, that biennial year. My thought was, if we rein in our spending a little bit going into that biennial fiscal year, or those biennial fiscal years, then our cuts that we would have to make with any reduction from state revenue would be a whole lot less at that point. So going into the 21-22 school year and 22-23 school years, be a whole lot less than if we spent all of our available state revenue next year and then tried to cut back in years going forward with any reduction from state revenue. It's a guess on my end that we are going to have a reduction in state revenue in the next legislative session. But in my honest opinion, I think it's an educated guess because we are missing so much in the way of sales tax revenue and oil and gas revenue that's causing that $4.5 billion shortfall at the state level. I don't see how some of that doesn't get passed on. So just so that you're aware, when we're looking at the budget, there's already a 5% reduction, which is about 1.9 million in state revenue. That's not for next year. That's actually for the year forward. It's kind of a forecasting little model in there to kind of rein in our expenditures. So budget highlights for next year, we have added staff for Simpson Elementary. There is a teacher step increase that's already included in our teacher pay scale. It's going to be $500 for every teacher who has 0 to 4 years of experience. And then starting at year 5, it's $600 increase from each step level. Again, there's a 5% reduction in state revenues. That's for a coming fiscal year. That's about 1.9 million. With that reduction in state revenues, the budget does not currently include any additional salary increases for staff. It is only that increase, that step increase for teachers that's included in the budget at this point. Board, you can direct us to not have a 5% reduction in state revenue. You can direct us to have a 10% reduction in state revenues. 5 was just a starting point, just a wild hair estimated guess on my end. We've also, for next year, we've increased campus budgets based off of expected enrollment growth. We've also had to increase our textbook adoption account. This is money that we get from the state. It's generally about $20 per student, $28 per student. We had 2 really big adoptions this year and last year. That was English, pretty much from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. And you can't buy English materials for $28 per student. So that account, the state money that we had for textbook adoption is currently exhausted. It's at 0. And so I've put $500,000 into a budget line for any adoption materials that we may need for this school year. So we've estimated student growth. If we miss that and need to go buy more math workbooks or English workbooks or any other book for that matter, I've set some money aside, local money, to do that because we don't have that state account this year going forward. We will get it replenished after this legislative session. Right now, there's total general fund revenue is budgeted at almost 7 million. Total expenditures of 93.5 million. There's about a $180,000 gap between revenue and expenditures right now. But you will also see on the sheet that I'd sent you last night in Excel that there's a list of about $300,000 of wants that aren't funded at this point too. So that's kind of where we are. So what comes next? We're going to prepare the summary budget for you and get that to you at or before your regular August meeting. We're going to make adjustments as requested and recommended by the superintendent or trustees. And then there will be a called meeting on the 31st where we will adjust the current year's revenues and expenditures to actual. We will adopt the original budget for next year. And if we have the rate and enough time from TEA, we will go ahead and try to set those tax rates for next year so that we can get all that accomplished. And then September 1, the new fiscal year budget opens for campuses and departments. That's a Tuesday, if memory serves correct, so we should be good. We should have the budget already loaded, and campuses should be able to start utilizing that money almost immediately. So I know that was quick. I know that was a lot. Any questions? What can I try to clarify or confuse even more?
I've got one question.
Thank you.
As far as ADA goes,
Yes, sir.
if somebody's getting taught online, and let's say both parents work, and they don't do their work until the evening, just by logging into the system, does that count for that day's attendance?
Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask for lifelines to stand by because I'm going to go way out of my lane here. I'm going to go into curriculum world, and that's a scary venture for me. Here's my understanding of it. You've got 2 models. You got synchronous and asynchronous. And why the state chose those, I don't really know, but they busted out the thesaurus and that's what they came up with. On the synchronous model, it essentially works as an extension of the classroom. So if they're not there at official attendance time, it's no ADA funding for that day. Student can do all the work at night, and turn it all in, they can still get a grade for it, but there's no funding associated with it. Asynchronous, there are 3 components for funding purposes, and the state doesn't care when the work is done. There has to be work towards an education plan, material, substantive conversations with the teacher, or they have to turn in an assignment. If they do one of the 3 at any point in that day for any class, that counts as attendance for that day for ADA purposes. Now, they may not do all of their work, and their grades may suffer, but for funding ADA purposes, as long as one of those 3 are met with asynchronous, that's a full day of funding.
Okay, we have ClassLink now. When we were shut down in the spring, we didn't have ClassLink. ClassLink now lets us know how long a student is online. It doesn't do grades, but it says this student was online from here till here. And it seemed like ClassLink also, there was something else ClassLink keeps up with that we couldn't keep up with last year.
So which one of those models are we using?
So our plan is going to be an asynchronous model with some components of synchronous built in. For funding purposes, it's going to be submitted as an asynchronous model. And the other part behind that is with synchronous, you do not get funding until 3rd grade. Pre-K, K, 1, and 2 do not get funding with synchronous model. So realistically, from an operations standpoint, it doesn't make sense to turn in a synchronous plan because you're not going to get funding for pre-K, K, 1, and 2. You will for 3 through 12, but I'm now in curriculum world, so I'm going to
Well, and you almost have to have live streaming. I mean, to have an interactive classroom, you have to have live streaming, and we don't have that much capability for that in every classroom. Dr. Averett?
So, yeah, you mentioned ClassLink. This was a discussion we had actually yesterday at the CNI department with Dr. Holt and her team. My understanding is that also it'll track as a student goes in from one class to another, you know, that student has engaged in, let's say, math for this amount of time, ELAR for this amount of time, social studies, et cetera. So it should be able to track that for that attendance.
And we'll be able to talk to parents more and explain to them, your child was online, though, but they turned in nothing, or they were in their English lesson, but they never went into math.
But we need them to do it that day for,
But yeah, I would think it'd have to be within the 24-hour period to be in class that day.
So, right, and still, I think there's still some questions. I know I have some questions about how we look at our attendance per day and who, of course, is responsible. You know, right now, a student comes into class at any grade level, the teacher takes attendance and reports that, you know, through Skyward to the attendance clerk, and the attendance clerk checks and makes sure everybody's on their attendance. And really what that person's doing all day is dealing with reconciling things from the previous day, looking at notes, making sure the field trip lists are right, which we know that's going to be an issue or not, or whatever, ISS list or DAP, whatever. And so there's going to be some things, kinks to work out as far as how attendance is taken. And that's still kind of up there in cloud mode right now for us. We're still trying to figure that out.
And so each district in the state has to offer distance learning, have to. And then you have to make an election with a document in Austin. You either do an attestation swearing that you will do synchronous instruction for every class, grade 3rd and up, or you submit a letter of intent that you will do asynchronous. Now, the letter of intent that you will do asynchronous doesn't mean that that's one size fits all. There could be some synchronous components within that, but just about every district in the state. I don't know what the total will be, but before the first day of school, everyone's submitting one of those 2. I believe every district in the state is going to be submitting an asynchronous letter of intent. We have already submitted that, and we'll be giving you that as a part of our update when we talk about all of the items that the superintendent has utilized under the authority that the board gave her in April. But we have submitted that letter on behalf of the district that we will pursue the asynchronous plan. Then by October 1, and honestly, it'll be much before that, but by October 1, we're required to submit our plan. And again, we will be submitting that around the time of our first day of instruction. But as soon as we can submit that plan, TEA has 45 days to review that plan. give us back comments or approval. If they don't automatically approve it, we'll have an opportunity to cure. But that's what keeps our funding solid for the whole first semester as we work with TEA to have our plan approved before we start the spring semester. But we really have no other choice but to submit one of those two, and just about everyone's going to be doing that asynchronous plan.
So that's why the attendance is important. But yes, they can do it at night, and they can log back on. It doesn't have to be continuous. It's a cumulative time, not continual.
And so just one more thing from Dr. Kane's perspective is this ClassLink is actually a single sign-on. So that's how it's able to track all of this. All of the programs that the district is using, all of the login information per student will be put into ClassLink. So you log in once to ClassLink, and that's how it knows you've opened Apex to do some assignment, because it's all embedded through that ClassLink. That's how it's got the ability to track usage and time and what you're working on.
Any other questions for Mr. Carlton?
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, our next item on the board workshop is discussion of draft for school reopening guidelines.
Yes, sir. The board has 3 documents. One, 2021 school year guidance for disease mitigation. One, secondary grade 6 through 12 operational and elementary. And because not every, I know there's a lot of people watching online, if the board makes some corrections here at the table, the corrections will be made ASAP after the meeting and posted online as a draft for the community, for parents, whoever wants to look at it. Then I'm going to ask you for another meeting in a couple of weeks to approve it, because we cannot start without the board approving the plan. I didn't want to put out the plan before the board looked at it, because I didn't want people calling asking about a plan you hadn't discussed. But what we did, we loaded it on the screen so that either Dr. Avett or Ms. Mott or Ms. Bridges will turn to the page so that the people online viewing it and the people in the audience can see what page we're talking about. So the kind of the overall one, and you had been sent these last night, so it wouldn't be new information to you. But we've worked closely with Nurse Bousquet, and Nurse Bousquet works closely with the medical community on our protocols for screening and isolation, what happens when a student displays the symptoms. I really feel like that this document covers just about every situation that will come up, but additionally, we have the frequently asked questions for those questions that do come specific. Sometimes a parent will say, specifically this question that we didn't think to include, it will be included on the FAQ that will be online for all to see all the time. And then secondary and elementary are mostly similar, except for the unique things that are fit to those various grade levels. So I know you had some questions, because actually some of the board members sent me questions from other people. So would you like to just start with your questions? Or concerns or comments?
I mean, there's a ton of information, and
And whatever your question is, we'll turn to that page so that everyone can see. And there'll be 3 different presenters, because Jeannie knows hers best. Ms. Bridges knows hers best, Dr. Avett knows his best, and Ms. Mott. They can turn to the right page immediately.
Can I ask a question? Okay. The main question that, well, I'll start by saying, of course, everyone, as Ms. Bridges knows, we surveyed, and we've got people all over the place. There's some people that are, they absolutely do not want to send their kids back to physical school, and then others are, the kids are dying to go back to school and all of that. So the main question that I've received is, if the kids go back to school and then there's a case that shows up, how can we make sure that those other kids in the class don't have to go back home and do distance learning?
Okay.
Does that make sense? Did I ask that?
Right. Our plan would be that, oh, Jenny, you want to go ahead?
Oh, I was just gonna say, we did outline, in this document, I'm looking for the page, I'm sorry that I don't have the page.
Oh, you start talking, I'll find the page for it.
We outline what is considered to be exposure, and Nurse Bousquet, I know, can elaborate on that more, but what exposure looks like is being within 6 feet of someone and getting, and I hate this word, I'm sorry, their bodily secretions on you, and they have a lab confirmed positive case. So in 4th through 12th grade, when we're asking kids to wear a mask, if you've been around someone and you're wearing your mask, that's not considered to be an exposure. Is that correct, Nurse Bousquet? So in that situation, if we had a 4th grade class, let's just say, because my daughter's going to be in 4th grade, those kids have been good about wearing their masks, and someone in their class tests positive, the other kids would not have to remain out of school because they have been protecting themselves and wearing their masks.
What we would do, Ms. Darnader, is we will have empty classrooms on each campus. So let's say mom calls and says, I just got the test back from the doctor and my child tested positive. That child would go to the isolation area, not a classroom, not to the nurse's office, to an isolation area, and they would wait for their parent to pick them up. The other children would be told by the teachers, pick up your stuff, that's yours. Don't pick up, school stuff, pick up your personal stuff and follow me to this next classroom. That's a clean classroom that has been sanitized. Likely that may have Chromebooks already set up, and there'd be some kind of throwdown, some lessons that would be prepared in case the teacher couldn't go on with the lesson they had for whatever instructional reasons. And then those students would stay in that classroom. We would wait the prescribed amount of time for anything that's in the air to land on hard surfaces. The custodial team would go in with 99% concentrated Lysol and/or that light gun, and they would sanitize that classroom for the length of time as prescribed by whichever one. That now it is a sanitized classroom. Meanwhile, the office will be notifying the parents of whoever, we'd be figuring out where that child has been and who that child has been with. So we would be notifying parents that we do have a confirmed case. It is a student, and this is just to notify you, and it would be a standard letter, or it is a standard letter.
And essentially, Dr. Kane just walked you through every bullet that's there on page 3 to 4. Where we got that definition is straight from TEA, and TEA, that definition is consistent with CDC, that close contact. And so, a lot of folks here will close contact being within 6 feet of someone. Well, shoot, I'm within 6 feet of a lot of folks. I can't always distance, but that's then the face covering ultimately is what we've been advised and directed as a protector. And so, so long as we can, as Jenny said, enforce the face covering, and ultimately that's what we plan to do for all of our kiddos, 4th grade and up, and all of our staff to wear the face coverings.
And we will encourage students in pre-K through 3rd to wear masks, but they won't be required to, because we know it's hard to keep a mask on, on a small child.
Okay, that's my question. How were those procedures changed for kids that are in those classes that aren't wearing the mask?
But Nurse Bousquet, would you like to weigh in on this?
That's going to be a tough question. In my opinion, if there is a student that is symptomatic, we need to have that spare classroom, immediately move the rest of the students into that classroom, and then immediately clean it. Have those students sanitize, wash their hands. I looked at about 20 hand washing videos for kids yesterday, trying to figure out what would be the best learning tool for them. So we're going to make sure everybody knows how to properly wash their hands. there's only so much we can do. I think we have to keep a perspective. If you're in a grocery store and you pick up a can of corn, you don't know who's touched that corn. You don't know if they've had COVID symptoms. So that's why hand washing is so important. And it's going to be, I think, a little bit tough on teachers, but it's going to be incumbent on them to monitor the amount of times our kiddos are washing their hands, sanitizing their hands, and following the protocols as best they can. There is going to be some risk. There's definitely going to be some risk, but, at some point, we've all got to go back. So I don't know if that helps you much, but it will be more difficult with the younger kiddos that don't have to wear masks, for sure.
Well, and just keeping them from touching their face and touching each
Right.
other's face. And Mr. Gomez, would you kind of give the board an overview and everyone who's listening online of the cleaning procedures and how you have trained the sanitizing crews?
Well, good morning, distinguished board, Dr. King. The way we're doing this is every day we're going in there after class and desanitizing, making sure that it's ready for the day before. In case we have an outbreak, we have crews that are going to be available that can go over within the hour to sanitize that classroom. And that's our goal, to go back in and just respray everything that's frequently touched, take what we call our electrostatic sprayers with hospital-grade disinfectant, and we just spray the entire room. And what it does, it just kills everything it comes into contact with. So we'll be there. We'll be ready to go. We've been planning since June. Excuse me, I get a little excited when I speak in public, but we're there, we're ready, and we'll have it done, and we'll take care of our kiddos. We really will.
And so each classroom will have, even though the custodians are going to clean, we're making bottles for each classroom. So if the teacher feels for whatever reason, we need to spray down everything, and we will have a stack of more paper towels than they need. So if for whatever reason the teacher says, you know what, we've been here 2 hours, let's everybody kind of wipe everything down, that would be their option, and they wouldn't have to go somewhere to get something or have somebody bring something in.
And what we've done so far is ordered some Lysol concentrate. We'll be mixing it into our spraying bottles. We're going to have a spraying bottle or two in every classroom at the beginning of the day. We'll be able to fill them back up, after the kids break off to go to lunch. We'll fill them back up. We'll have them there. They'll always be available. We'll have plenty of paper towels available for them to go ahead and sanitize anything and everything that they wish. So it'll be a matter of just spraying it on, waiting 15 seconds, and then wiping it off, and 99.9% of all the germs should be pretty much eliminated. So we're prepared. If you all want to one day just come over and let us show you what we do, we'd be more than happy to put on a demonstration for you.
That might, that probably wouldn't be a bad demo that Ms. Bridges and Nurse Bousquet could that we could put online. So let's just go ahead and plan on doing that.
All righty.
Just pick a campus and kind of put up a scenario and.
We'll just pick out a classroom, we'll meet there, and we'll show you exactly what we do, and we'll let you see the products that we're using so that you can feel comfortable with them. We'll be more than happy.
And that we are literally using Lysol. We're not using a Lysol substitute or generic Lysol. We are using Lysol.
Any other questions? Anything?
Thank you, Mr. Gomez.
You're welcome, ma'am. Thank you.
I have a question for Ms. Bousquet. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I highly value your opinion and expertise. In your opinion, everything that we have in front of us is more than adequate for our staff, for our teacher, for our students, everyone involved?
I think so, Dusty. I just feel like we're going to do everything we can do. And we're going to try to keep kids and staff as safe as possible. And this is a good plan. We're going to have positive cases. We are. That's just the nature of this beast of a virus that we've got. But I think we're doing all we can to keep everybody safe. And the good news is if anybody's not comfortable with it, then they have an option of keeping their kids at home.
Your staff prepared for what's or what could possibly
They will
happen?
be. They're not yet. I'm getting 1,000 questions, and we're doing the best to answer them. But yes, we'll be ready. We'll take it on.
Thank you.
Okay?
Mr. Aubenshine, would you go down to the threat level assessment and explain how principals are going to know which threat level we're either substantial or moderate or minimal, so they'll know what procedures to follow?
We've been very fortunate to have a great working relationship with Waxahachie Emergency Management, Thomas Griffith, the Emergency Management Coordinator for our community, and then also Ellis County, Samantha Pickett, leading Ellis County's efforts. Genuinely been very appreciative of the amount of information they have gotten us. And each day, they've sent us a situation report that has let us know how many cases there are in Ellis County, historically, active, recovered, and then those few unfortunate deaths. And then also how many cases are in each community. And so we've chosen to highlight Ellis County as the place we will look because we have kids really from all over the county. Our district in and of itself extends into the unincorporated area, and then two, because of Global High School and some of our other transfers, we get kids from all over. So we're looking at Ellis County, and with 100 or more active cases in the county, we will be at level red. We can go to school at level red, but that means that that's our substantial level or our red level. And with that amount of cases, we'll ultimately be doing the highest level of screening of all of our individuals. We'll be requiring the masks with fourth grade and up, and we will be doing that at the moderate level as well, requiring masks. Moderate, we would drop down to moderate if we have between 26 and 100 cases in the county. I don't know when that day will come, but for the foreseeable future, we believe during the month of August, likely during the month of September, we're going to see the number of cases in Ellis County warrant the use of face coverings, and the only reason we would be reducing that is when the actual numbers start to really decline and then stay for 14 days or more at 25 or less cases in the county. That's when we would be then down in this blue or green level, the minimal level, when we can get down to 25 cases, active cases in the county. And at that point, you'll see us reduce then the requirements while still allowing and even encouraging those who can't socially distance to wear a mask because we believe while you have cases, it's the prudent thing to do. And we know that during this school year, we will still have parents who elect to do online learning throughout the whole school year. They have that right. And we know that we will have kids who are at school, because we want them at school, that are more comfortable wearing a mask. We'll have staff that's just more comfortable wearing a mask, and they'll be allowed to do so through the year.
And also on the substantial side of that, every year there's flu, and TEA has a rule that when a certain % of your kids are absent, the school needs to shut down. We would be following that as well. I talked to the county judge yesterday because he was also concerned and trying to work with us. What would that threshold be? Well, we'll probably just use the same number that TEA uses, and that would be a school or the school district. If it's in that school would shut down. If it's the school, overall school average, it would be we would close the school district as a precaution.
And that's the benefit that the board, you gave us by having 13 extra days in our calendar. In the event we had, let's say, 12% at a particular campus, 12% in our district that are positive, and we believe it's prudent to shut down, you've given us 13 extra days in our calendar that we could shut down and not stress our teachers, not stress our families, those that want to be in physical school. We have some flexibility to then not require universal at-home learning should we just need to shut down for a day. And as Dr. Kane said, that happens. We've been fortunate that it hasn't happened here in Waxahachie, but within Ellis County, there have been plenty of school districts that have shut down for a day or two, make a long weekend in January when flu numbers have spiked. So it is a common practice, much like you would use an ice day or other bad or inclement weather day.
Just to clarify again, third grade and below, they won't let us require that, correct? But we're going to encourage them to wear masks?
We will encourage it. Ultimately, the governor's order is for all Texans 10 and up. There hasn't been an expression that you're prohibited from making a local requirement. But with the youngest kids, you have to worry about potential choking hazards and other things too. So, I mean, we have pre-K. It's just impractical to require or even really expect a 4-year-old to be able to consciously and maturely wear a mask in the same way that you do require than someone who's 10 and older.
And on the 10-year-old thing, which is basically fourth grade, we just said fourth grade because some kids are 9, some kids are 10. We're just saying fourth grade. Now, if you happen to be 10 in third grade, you don't have to wear a mask because we're not going to point that out. So that's how we pick fourth grade rather than 10 years old.
Mr. Allenshine, I haven't kept up the last few days. What are our numbers now in Ellis County?
We're just under 300. The most recent numbers we had of active cases, and that's the number I focus on. The total cases is, I believe now, total historic cases throughout this entire event is just under 2,000. But active, I believe that active number is about 280 in the county, and then the most recent active number I saw for Waxahachie was 80. With, I believe, 9 of those being school-aged kids, but it was 80 in Waxahachie and about 280 in Ellis County
Okay, thank you.
of active cases.
I have a question for Dr. Abrant. Could you please address the procedures that teachers are going to have to follow? If I'm a computer lab teacher and I've got kids that are coming and going each period, how are we going to get the computers clean between classes?
Right, so that was one of the questions that I talked to Mr. Gomez yesterday, because Mr. O'Daniel with Unified Connections also asked me that, because he was getting the same question. And so my question was, is our Lysol spray that we're using, the 99.9% effective Lysol spray, can we apply that to, let's say, a keyboard or a tablet surface? And the answer is yes. He used 15 seconds. I've done some research on how long that has to sit on something before it has the kill time is 10 seconds actually. And so we believe that a light spray over the keyboard and a wipe is going to take care of that. So that would be the procedure at the end of the class or whatever, would be a light spray on the keyboard and a wipe with a paper towel, and that should take care of it.
Now, will each kid be expected to do that, or is the teacher going to be expected to go around and do that before the next class comes in?
Well, I'll kind of piggyback on what Nurse Busquet said, is that some of this is going to be procedural for the teacher in the class. I think at certain age groups, our students are very capable of using a paper towel to wipe off their work surface. I mean, we ask kids in lab type situations all the time to clean up their lab space. This is just a little bit an extension of that. Mr. Gomez did ask that, that with the actual spray, the chemicals that the Lysol, is that, we don't give that to our younger kids to use because we don't want somebody spraying it in their face or whatever. That we'd ask the teacher to be the person to be the responsible for that. And if I need to yield the floor to Mr. Gomez, I'm happy to do so. But that would be most likely teachers are going to have that responsibility, will be an added one.
And we'll have our electrostatic sprayers available at every campus. So if let's say, for example, we have a 5 or 10 minute break between classes, when they're using their computers, we can go back in there and real quickly
Get closer
spray
to-
with the.
closer to the
Step over by the microphone.
We can actually go and spray pretty quickly in the room and with the electrostatic sprayer and just disinfect everything. And within 15 to 30 seconds, it's ready to go. And again, when we show you how we clean the room, we'll show you how that sprayer works. It's actually pretty remarkable and pretty easy.
Mr. Gomez, I have had several questions from teachers, and I don't know if it's a question for you or one of the curriculum people or one of the, Ms. Mott or Dr. Averett. But I've had teachers all across the board ask about their supplies because, I mean, shared supplies questions. I mean, because, you know, are they going, I mean, will we be sanitizing these supplies or will we be expecting, will we be expecting the teachers, the kids to have their own supplies? What is the thought process on that? Or
That's probably more Ms. Mott on how
We're
we're,
discouraging the use. In this plan, we discourage the use of shared supplies. So the kids would have their own pencils, they would have their own crayons, and they're
Okay.
the only ones who use it. Now, if there's something in the classroom, a manipulative or
Jenny,
something like that, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not close enough, sorry. If there's a manipulative or something that needs to be used by multiple kids, they'll have the equipment to sanitize it between
Okay.
uses.
One of the concerns that I had from the elementary level was that if the students had to go home, will we have like bags of the manipulatives to send home with them? Are we going to have extra supplies, I guess, for them?
That would be really tough. We don't have an abundance of those. Usually we have just enough for like a small group or something to work with those manipulatives. A lot of times manipulatives are things that you can create at home. I mean, instead of counting cubes to learn math concepts, you can count spoons or you can count whatever. So we can get creative, and our teachers are super creative about the different manipulatives that they would be able to use at home. So if not possible to send some home, then we'll come up with a creative alternative for home use.
I think this would be a really good segue. The students, one of the concerns from teachers, because I have a long list of concerns from teachers, and one of the concerns from teachers is the 3 days prior to school to get ready and then, you know, to be ready. That, I mean, they put it in many different ways in my notes, but, you know, that they woefully inadequate is what they're saying. And so they're asking, many have asked me if there's a possibility that we would move back the start for students. I mean, because that is what is happening. I know even Red Oak has moved the start for students back a week, and that's what I've had several teachers ask me.
Ms. Kriegel?
Is that a possibility?
when we have this next meeting, one, you need to approve the plan. Two, there's a couple of things on the calendar that need to be looked at. One is Fair Day, because they've all canceled the fair. Do we make that a teacher work day? Do we make, you know, that would be something we will recommend. And homecoming, now that we have the football schedule, homecoming, we have a day off in the schedule for homecoming, which doesn't fit with the football schedule anymore. So the board needs to look at the calendar again. If the board feels like we need to change that start date, that would be the time for the board to say so.
Well, my only concern with that is are we 3 weeks from school starting? So we need to probably not wait 2 weeks to.
Okay, the one thing is, I could have that meeting in 72 hours, but as soon as the board, because my question to the board is going to be, when are you comfortable approving this?
Right.
That would be when we have that meeting,
Right.
unless the board wants to have 2 meetings, a calendar meeting and this meeting. But, so as soon as, I think probably President Autry is going to pull the board and say, when are you going to be ready to approve the plan? And that day, I had planned to put the calendar on.
Right. And that would be fine. I'm
so-
just saying that, you know,
So, I had a question
we're
on
very
when-
close to school starting.
When will our principals have this?
Right.
Oh, principal's already seen it.
Principals have this.
Yeah.
And when will they be able to share it with their entire staff?
Okay, the plan is, because principal, one reason that you were sent several different copies is you've got the original one, and then the one after the principals, and then the one after, I don't know who we talked to after that, I think Nurse Bousquet. So it's been in transition. This is our presentation, and as soon as this meeting's over, we're going to put this out, and Jenny's going to put draft all over it, so that you will have time to have input, to receive input. And, I mean, literally, by the time some of you get to your car, it'll probably be out. You know, I don't know, board briefs, sometimes we're not even out of the room before Jenny sends them out. So if you don't change anything at the table here, then this will go out immediately for everyone to look at. Then, whenever you're ready to have that next meeting, is when we're going to have that next meeting. And the calendar will be on that unless you want to have a calendar meeting alone.
And board, we can do what we did with rezoning and other things where we make a note on that page where these are posted to ask people to email any comments to info@wisd.org, which I receive, and then I can put those together for you. We can give people a certain amount of time, and then I can compile the results and send that to you. If that's
That would be great as far as I'm concerned. I want to hear what they have to say. I mean, there's going to be something that I'm missing here. I don't have to abide by these every day.
Well, and that's why we built in the time to do this, okay? And the ones we're looking at are the ones, just to make certain we're all looking at the same ones. I know we have dates and everything, but it'd be the one, Billy has the last set the
Yes,
board
ma'am.
just got. Those will be the,
I will ask
Okay.
Billy to give me those and
In
make sure,
fact-
and then I'll ask Ms. Murphy to post them ASAP.
yeah, right. Unless there's an objection from the board, we could have Ms. Bridges go ahead and post this now.
And as you would imagine, safety for staff, safety for students, it's in all protocols. So you've got the one, just general one we've been talking about because that's the best, most complete guidance that's just focused on keeping folks safe and keeping folks healthy. But within the proposed secondary guidelines and the proposed elementary guidelines, we again focus on it because at this point, that's the number one priority is to, tell the public and have folks with a sense of security sending their children to school that it's our number one priority to keep folks healthy and let folks have in-person learning. And so the safety protocols are in all three of the proposed protocols.
Okay. I have another question. If a student is absent and they can still be present versus via synchronous and asynchronous means, are the teachers going to be required to be having in-class classes and have the remote learning at the same time? It's probably Ms. Mott or Mr. Averett, Dr. Averett.
Okay, let me make sure I understand your question. Are you asking if, like, Mr. Rogers has a classroom, is he going to have in-class students that he's monitoring as well as distance learning?
That's what the question is, yes.
Okay. The answer, no, okay. Mr. Rogers is an in-class, on-campus teacher, and then Ms. Kriegel is our online teacher, okay? So let's say a kiddo in Mr. Rogers' classroom comes down with symptoms or tests positive and needs to switch over to an online platform. So we would then go into Skyward and transfer that student from Mr. Rogers' homeroom to Ms. Kriegel's homeroom, who is the online learner. And as soon as we add them into Seesaw, they're going to pop up. They already have their login, and it should be seamless. They should be able to transition right over to Ms. Kriegel's online platform. And then let's say they're out for 14 days and they're symptom-free or they test negative and they want to return to campus, we go into Skyward, we transfer that kiddo back into Mr. Rogers' classroom.
And Ms. Kriegel, you can see how this plays heck on our 22-to-1 because both of you have 22, and then in that scenario now, you have 23 and he has 21. Okay, that goes over our 22-to-1. And so the next day, the same thing happens. Now you got 24 and he got 20. So keeping that 22-to-1, we're going to be bringing a lot of waivers to you because we wouldn't hire another teacher because within 2 weeks, then you're back to where you need to be.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Kane, for that explanation. Okay, I'm skipping through my list. I explained to Dr. Kane,
Hold on, Ms. Kriegel. I know
I'm
Ms.
sorry.
Starnader had a couple of questions as well. Go ahead, Ms.
Thank you all for answering questions, and I hope we have people watching because sometimes I think it's
But we
good
can
to
find
talk-
out how many are watching.
There are a couple hundred watching right now.
Oh, almost
Wow.
400.
Okay. Good, because sometimes it's, people don't like to read through everything, so they can just hear it being talked about. But address visitors to campuses. I know it's talked
Okay.
about some in here. I
Okay.
mean, and I hope that our community will understand that,
Yes.
we need to keep that.
When we talk about
Down.
safety, it is probably one of the most difficult things we did was when we decided that we were going to keep everyone out of the building. And that would mean if you're a parent and you need to have a parent-teacher conference, one, we're going to ask you to Zoom. And two, if it's a meeting and the parent says, I don't feel comfortable Zooming, I want a face-to-face meeting, that meeting will not occur in the teacher's classroom, it'll in the administrative office suite. Because as much as we hate, now usually we're begging parents to come up and be participants, but until we get to the point that we can allow outsiders other than teachers and staff and kids in a building, the kiss and hug zone for elementary is going to be outside the front door.
I've got that pulled up. This is from the secondary plan, but the protocol for campus visitor, part of it is up there on the screen right now. So like Dr. Kane said, yeah, we're going to encourage Zoom virtual. No, sorry, that's not me doing that. Kind of forced it for a second. We're going to encourage a Zoom or a WebEx type meeting in any way as we can. Principals expressed to me that our meetings went really well in the spring. When we did Zoom our meetings, that was actually a pretty good platform to use. But like Dr. Kane said, some folks, they may not have the capability to do that. It might be an issue technology-wise for them, but they really need to come in and have a face-to-face meeting. There will be protocols in place. And we know that parents like to come and bring a special lunch, on birthdays and things like that. And I know our campuses a lot of times have a little designated area for parents to eat. That's going to have to be, those practices are just really not going to be able to happen like they've had in the past. It's just not a good move. So we're pretty much eliminating those kind of things. And just like anything else in a meeting, we're going to ask that people, if they are in a face-to-face, let's say our meetings are a great example because they happen a lot, that we'll hopefully have it in a spot where we can be as spread out as possible. And if the number of participants is large, that we could have some via Zoom maybe and some via face-to-face to reduce the number of folks in one small space. And of course, if the mask requirement's there, which is most likely going to be, then we'll ask people to use face coverings.
Wonder if there's let's say a retired teacher that knows about the gap that the kids are going to have. Excuse me. Would they be allowed to come in and tutor? Let's say if a fifth grade math teacher has a whole lot of kids that are behind and they would like the help of this person, will they be able to go in and tutor? If they follow all the protocols, of course.
My quick answer would be yes. I would say, I would look at that like we look at, let's say, private instructors for band, for example. Private lessons are going to be able to continue as long as people follow the appropriate protocols. So I'm going to just kind of extrapolate a little bit and say I would approach that in the same way. If somebody is, if they are connected to the school in that way and they're providing that service and even as a volunteer for that, I would say yes. I would treat it kind of like we're going to treat private lesson instructors, like say for our band program. I can't see why we wouldn't.
Agreed. Except we have an extensive volunteer program, and I think you've worked with Ms. Cobb on that.
Well, and to be in that program, one would have to sign up for a background check through our HR that's similar to the background check that our employees have. If you're going to have that kind of close contact with our students, and I say that close contact, that's any year, not just this year, but someone that's in our system that's then doing something that's verifiable to help advance a child's education. We're still about that. I mean, we're still going to be able to, as Dr. Averitt said, bring in those instructors to help advance our kids' education. And the good news is that we know the kids that are physically with us, those are the kids whose families have chosen to be physically with us, and they're going to want and expect that same access to education. And we're going to try to do everything we can within safe protocols to bring them that education. The issue with visitors in general, including parent visitors, it makes me ache to say that a parent is an outsider, so to speak, that a parent can't just come to class for a party or come to class or come to just a meeting. But we've got to keep our visitors, the non-education, the non-instructor visitors, to a minimum to keep everyone safe and to be able to stay open.
Yeah, that's another tough one.
I think Melissa had one more question. I'll come back over here then.
I think this is a secondary level question. I did have a couple of parents ask me about safety, like, you know, you don't know all the kids, and you have some kid walking in. Like, I know the other day, I walked in somewhere, and I had my mask on and my sunglasses. You don't know who I am. Did y'all talk about that? Oh, gosh.
Well, I know I've thought about it a lot because
yeah.
y'all know my background as a principal and know
Right.
that I like dress codes and I like things that make, because I know when somebody doesn't follow those things, they stick out like a sore thumb. So that's why I've always been a proponent of those things. Now I understand fashion and all that stuff too, but so yes, I do feel like that is. It's going to be a reason why we are going to have to be as strict as we can on our student ID requirements, and we're going to have to be checking those. Now, it might be something, if we have a question, we'd say, you know, pull your mask down, let me see your ID kind of thing. But yeah, you're right. That's one of those concerns. I feel like we're in a good place right now in WISD with. The leadership of our SRO program, I think, is fantastic. The new officers that we're bringing on were chosen because they're great, and I think that Lieutenant Oliver has done a fantastic job of working with our security staff and placing them throughout our district in ways in schools where they're going to be able to serve real well. So, you know, like. Nurse Bousquet said, you know, we're gonna have some risk. That's an honest answer. But I think that you know, we make our students wear their IDs because our dress code is pretty lax. I mean, we know that. So that ID is going to be very important.
And as close as we'd like to be to 100% attendance on day one, you're going to get 4 Avonshine kids on the first day you open school. But as much as we would like every parent to put their child physically in our school, we know based on our surveys that that's not going to happen. And so let's say on the first day of school we have 60% in physical attendance. Well, we're going to have 100% of our security and 100% of our SRO. There is no virtual security. There is no virtual SRO. They're going to be here. So thanks to you, board, we have 6 security officers at the high school. We have 2 SROs that will be permanently stationed at the high school. That's 8 folks for foreseeably less kids on day one. And then as folks get more secure in the notion that after 6 weeks they make that election to bring their child back, or the next 12 weeks they make the election to bring their child back, hopefully it's at a time when the masks aren't as required because the cases have dropped. So while we're in heavy mask season, we're probably going to be in reduced enrollment season with full staff to at least check. Now that isn't perfect. I agree with you. When it's this, and absolutely, you're going to have to be conscientious. And if you can't see that badge, they're going to stop the child and ultimately be referred to office or home. And in part, your agreement to come to school and physically be present means you agree to abide by these safety requirements. And if you wind up with a child that's refusing, a high school student that's refusing to wear a mask, or a high school student that then is exhibiting any of these symptoms, we're going to be pursuing, as we would with a teacher, let the nurse know if it's a health reason, or let the assistant principal know if it's a discipline reason, because ultimately a child that's agreeing to come to school is also agreeing to, you know, be a good neighbor, be a responsible citizen, and help us do the things that keeps everyone safe, so that we can have that school. And if they won't, then we have online learning available.
Mr. Rogers?
Yeah, just props to everybody for the plan. Y'all seem to think of everything. And I think, like anything else, a lot of, big percentage of these things will work themselves out. Good teachers will figure out how to adapt and overcome a lot of these things. One thing that I've heard from the public is how rigid or how flexible are we going to be for going in and out? Maybe if they wanted to go online and then they wanted to go in person. I mean, what are some of the, can we verbalize what the
Right.
policy is on that?
Right now, it's every 6 weeks. And that's because it's in the best interest of grading, that it's at the end of 6 weeks. You should have the same teachers, you should cover the same material. And now, that's the rule. Now, if a parent called and said, my husband and I are getting a divorce, I need to go back to work, I need to send my kid to school, yes. Now, even without that, if someone brings their kid to school, by law, you have to, we are a compulsory attendance state, and we're just trying to discourage that because instructionally, it's not good for the child. We don't want them getting mad at this teacher, so they're going to go to school, then they get mad at their distance teacher, and I mean, that just wouldn't, now, I don't know how we can control that legally, but it really would not be in that. We would probably meet with the parent and try to solve that, but we're asking that if they make 6 weeks choices. Now, if there's a good reason, and then certainly we would accept it. But we're just trying to avoid the back and forth, and I've changed my mind, and I've lost my device, and.
That answer your question? Yep. Okay, Ms. Krieger?
Okay, I have a question about substitutes.
Yeah, find us some.
Well, I know, and we do desperately need to, because last year I know that, I don't know about the elementary level, but I know at the junior high levels and at the high school. Of course, at the high school last year, they taught 6 of 8, and sometimes they were asked to cover a class quite often. And then at the junior high levels, they combine classes. And so obviously, we're going to have a problem with social distancing, or from my perspective, what our class size is, getting them into a classroom, and we're not going to be able to add another 10 to 15 kids into those classrooms and have any kind. So we really need to get as many subs, this is just a statement from me.
Oh, no,
We need to
I
get
agree.
as many subs as we can, because again, the high school teachers will be teaching 7 of 8, so they won't have an extra conference period to cover, and then with social distancing. And that leads to how, with our crowded schools, how are we going to have the junior high and high school levels social distance, like in the cafeteria and in the hallways? I mean, is there a plant going to be a plant?
Actually, I visited a junior high just the other day, and the principal had already, and this was like probably a week ago, had already designed, he and his 2 assistant principals had already designed putting tables together, just 2 or whatever, and this particular campus has kind of got a bar, not a ledge, around the outside, so there were chairs already set every 6 weeks. So every campus principal, example at the high school, those booths are designed to come out.
Right.
I don't know if Ms. Harris is going to make that decision, but she could say, take all these booths out, and her campus is actually so big, and keep in mind, we'll have a third less kids approximately.
Right.
She may give the band kids, because Rich Armstrong will take his kids at lunch anytime if there's not classes. If you behave, you guys can go down here and eat lunch in their little, they have those little social areas.
Yes.
But now, if you misbehave, there is no appeal. We take that pass away from you and you go back to the cafeteria. Our principals can be very creative same thing with library, okay? We will be maximizing every space humanly possible.
And passing in the hallways, I mean, I assume there's going to be like different.
Some of them will probably choose to do one-way hallways. That doesn't always work because it will never work out perfectly, unless you're going around. Dr. Avery, you want to weigh in on it?
Yeah, I was going to say, in the guidelines, it does mention that. It's kind of broad in its statement that we talked to the secondary principals the other day, and I told them, part of this is going to be your job as principal and your team, your administrative team, to come up with some solutions for these issues. Transition periods is one of those. One of the things that it recommends is propping the door open during passing periods, so people aren't grabbing every door handle after everybody else. That's pretty simple. The question was, well, we don't have door stops, and Mr. Gomez says, no problem, we'll get you door stops. And then the question was, well, do we leave them open all the time? Well, no, we're not going to just leave them open, because that's in direct conflict with the safety guidelines that we have on our campus, that we keep doors closed and locked during class time. So no, we won't. But during passing periods, it's a good idea to have the door open. So in that high frequency time when people would be grabbing a door, that we're not going to have that problem. We're going to ask students to walk as far to the right as they can in the hallway, so that to mitigate the cross, in each other's face as they're walking past each other. Now, in the situation where everybody has a face covering on, that will minimize that significantly. There's also some statements in there about looking at staggering release times, and I know that's harder than it sounds probably when you just say that, but there is the opportunity for schools or campuses to say, okay, we may do by gender or by grade level or by hallway at a time, so to minimize the let's say, if we're at 60% of the high school, 1,800 kids at one time going into the hall at once, that we make it stagger that some. Now, that may make transition periods act a little bit longer because we're staggering it, but that's also something we can work out. Yes, some of that is going to be campus level creativity that's going to have to come from the principal and his or her team and their leadership team of teachers.
Ms. Mott, would you weigh in on Ms. Kriegel's question as far as elementary is concerned?
Related
to how to minimize some of the transition and common areas.
So one of the ways that we will be minimizing is that if you are team teaching with a team of 2 or 3 teachers, students are going to stay put in that homeroom, and the teachers will be coming to the students. So math will be pushed into the classroom. Principals, I'm giving them latitude on how they want to do their specials. Depending on the building, it's easier to social distance more than other buildings. Some of them are choosing to do push-in model for specials as well. Some of them are choosing, like PE, obviously if we can get outside, that's our best option. We do have some special rotations where there are 2 classrooms of kiddos in PE at one time, and Ms. Authier came up with a great solution for that. So her PE certified teacher has 1 classroom in the gym or outside, and the aide will push into that other classroom that week and do an in-class physical activity with social distancing. The next week they'll flip-flop, so each kid gets into that gym or outside activity every other week. If we can go outside, we can take both groups outside, social distance, and do the same activities with those 2 different teachers. So we're minimizing as much movement as we can in the hallways. We already have in place solid travel to the right procedures through our PBIS. That's a big component of that, is single file traveling on the right-hand side of the hallways. And of course, we want to completely minimize the number of kids in the hallways. It's no more, can you take this to so-and-so teacher during this time? It's stay in that hallway unless it's an emergency to go to the restroom. I'm going to need you in the classroom.
For the elementary teachers, I saw sometimes they may have to eat in the classroom, and what does that do with our teachers' duty-free lunch?
Right. So my first recommendation to elementary principals was to do what we can to keep them in the cafeteria with social distancing. Of course, keeping in mind, we're not at 100% enrollment at that time on campus. So I think it's pretty appropriate, and they were mapping it out, that they could keep social distancing in their cafeteria and follow the requirements. And that makes it a little bit easier for us to clean in between and for the 30-minute duty-free lunch, which we absolutely will give our teachers. I did talk with a principal yesterday who is going a little bit more restrictive than that, and she does want to do in the classroom. And so I cautioned her to check into a few things. Number one, absolutely 30 minutes of duty-free lunch, and how are you going to cover that with your staff? And then secondly, the cleaning protocols, because Mr. Gomez met with us on Monday, and we talked through what does that look like in a classroom when you eat breakfast or lunch in the classroom, and making sure that it's clean and we don't want ants and things coming in. And so advised her to, see if she could get around those things. If you can get around those things, you have enough extra support staff on your campus, then that principal has the discretion to do those things. They just have to be aware that 30 minutes, absolutely, we will adhere to that.
Okay,
And
thank you.
we also have to be careful with how we do the lunch, because if kids go get their lunch, it gets
Exactly.
reimbursed, as opposed to
Yes.
if it's delivered, we don't, so.
We absolutely want kids going to the cafeteria and picking up their lunch, no matter what the protocol is for where they eat the lunch, because for a cafeteria point of sale is very, very important. And we want to continue to be consistent in how we're doing that. They are picking it up in the cafeteria. Another thing that we've added, and I had this at Shackelford when I was there, but ID badges for elementary kids at lunchtime. So that traditionally a kiddo comes through the lunch line, an elementary kiddo, and they type in, if they know their ID number, they type in their ID number and it takes them a couple times. Then we'd have to, like when you go to HEB or something, they wipe it down between each customer. There's no way that we have time to accomplish that. So Mr. Gerke has, in transportation, he is printing through Live Touch every kiddo to have an ID badge, and it has their picture on it if they're a returning student, their ID number, and a barcode. So when the kiddo comes through there at lunch, they just scan that lunch card. It's touchless. No one's, you're not going to have to clean the thing in between. So that will help as well.
Ms. Timmerman had 2 questions that she had texted me, and I didn't know if you were going to ask me at the meeting, or you may just read your question and answer it. Okay.
Ms. James?
I had a couple of questions, teacher concerns. One is, if I'm able to go to school, I'm a teacher, and I could teach at school, but I am the direct care person for somebody in my family that can't get out, and I need to teach remotely. Am I going to be able to do that?
I think we're discouraging remotely because each teacher has their classroom. They're able to go into their classroom and shut themselves off. So they're still available to the campus as needed. The encouragement is be cognitive. Watch the entrance of the campus so that you can strategically plan your time to go into the building. And the other thing is put something on your door saying do not disturb, with either a text, a number to be able to be contacted, whether it's your extension or whether you have someone text you or call you. So
Okay, well, I
that's
need to
what we're
stay
hearing.
home because my child has something wrong with them. They can't go to school, and I'm the sole person to take care of that child.
Okay. In that instance, if we don't have the availability for them to be able to distance learn, we have 2 leaves that they're eligible, they could take. But those leaves aren't paid leaves, well, to a point. We have one that's paid the first 10 days, and then that leave no longer exists. And then you have what they call the emergency FML. Well, if the situation, if that child is sick, then they would qualify for that. But it doesn't pay the first 10 days, but it does pay you 2/3 of your pay for up to the 12 work weeks.
Okay, well, my child's not sick.
They're just,
They can't come to school because of fear of getting COVID, because of other health concerns that they have. I can't take my child. I'm the sole provider for that child. I'm a good teacher. I want to remotely teach. I should be able to do that.
that's a call for again, the academic staff, because again, they're trying to be consistent with the way they're doing things, and because you're being cautious is one thing, but the requirement to come to work is another. So, yes, we would all want to be cautious. We all want to do what's best for our children, whether it's coming to school or whether it's us staying home. But for precautionary reasons, we don't have that option as much. Now, if they have medical reasons, definitely, but precautionary reasons, initially, that was a concern, and there was some coverage for that, but moving forward, there's not any coverage for that. So they either would have to take that time off in a leave, or the academic team would have to make a decision on who comes in and who does not.
Ms. Timmerman, what we would do is, we would very much discourage that, because actually, when the teachers at schools, they're going to be in teams and they're going to be in rooms, and that's where their stuff is. And that was one concern they had in the spring. They went home for spring break, they didn't take their things. So when they came back, you're teaching from home, you don't have your stuff. So we're discouraging that. Now, I'm not saying there's not an exception, but most of the principals know. I mean, if all of a sudden your child has a disease that no one's known about before, and we're suspicious, we'll probably go with the doctor's note. I think we would have a review team to look at that. But wholesale, we need our teachers on campuses. But as you're pointing out, there's always an exception that it's not the parents' fault, it's not the kids' fault, and we can make it work. It's kind of like the ADA accommodations. If your job is something we can accommodate in that way, but it would be something we would have to convince the principal and the academic team that this was really an exception, rather than go to the leave if we had to. And so in the case if exactly what you described is what's happening, I can see that as being a reason, but it would have to be something extreme. Like, everyone knows this child's been sick, you've taken off so much time to take care of it. We get it. Let's see if we can make accommodations. But we don't want to go to the extreme of that, if you want to stay home, you can, because better distance instruction will happen when they're at school.
Oh, I agree with that, but if.
There are exceptions.
Okay, that's all I want to know, there are exceptions. Okay.
And we'll start with the principal.
Okay. Also, you know how rumors are now with everything going on. There's a rumor out there that if a teacher does teach remotely, their salary's going to be adjusted.
Not if they're teaching remotely. If they have to go out for whatever the reason and they're teaching remotely, their salary will not be impacted. Now, if they go out and can't teach for whatever the reason,
Right.
then yes, their salary will be impacted.
Okay, wonder if I'm a teacher and I have to be sent home to quarantine because I've been with a student that wasn't protected or whatever. Those 14 days, do they come off the teachers?
That they will be considered part of a leave. Now, if the teacher's in a situation and we are being flexible, as Dr. Kane said, making exceptions, then they can still continue. If they're just quarantining and not sick themselves, and they can continue to work, then they will continue to be paid.
But we also don't know where they got sick. I mean, we don't know that that's the child. I mean, if they just went to a family reunion over the weekend,
Right.
and family from 6 states came in, I mean,
I'm
that's.
talking about a school situation where, they're in the room where a child or whoever they've come in contact with and they weren't protected. And we know that that's where it happened from. That's what I'm talking about.
They would also be eligible to apply for or to claim workers' compensation. Now, workers' compensation is being very proactive in tracing all steps to determine whether or not it is something that happened at the school or something that could have happened somewhere else. So they're being very proactive in making sure that the claims are
Right.
compensable, legitimate claims for the district.
Right.
So,
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, Ms. James, would you please repeat that? So if a teacher is a student and has COVID in her classroom, I'm sorry, a teacher has COVID in her classroom, so she has to self-quarantine, go home because she was close to that. So will that be covered, or will they have to take their sick leave days that they have accumulated? I'm sorry, please
No,
explain
so
again.
Actually, if they're quarantining and
Okay.
they're not sick, they can continue to work,
Okay,
okay? So they're not charged their days. If for some reason they get ill themselves, yes, it's just like any leave. They would be on a leave of absence. And yes, they would definitely have an impact on their salary. And there's choices of using their days for 100% of their pay, or accepting the 2/3 pay under the emergency FML, or they can work. I mean, I think we're trying to make arrangements if for some reason they all have to quarantine, that we do something to help them not to lose that time.
Okay, and then there is, I believe, a federal program that grants them 10 days quarantine time.
Yes, ma'am. It's the federal pay program.
And then every year they get 10 additional days?
Yes.
Okay. What if they're out for COVID, they become ill, and will they be eligible for the sick leave bank for that?
Well, it depends on what kind of condition they have. Again, the sick leave bank is for catastrophic reasons. So if they're having a catastrophic situation during COVID, then yes, they will be eligible for the catastrophic leave bank. If they're just having moderate conditions, it's not really considered catastrophic. So we have to look at the case-by-case issue. In this year is one of the years we want to stress that the bank is used for catastrophic reasons.
Right, but okay, so the sick leave bank, but they don't have a choice. I mean, because until they're cleared and have a a negative COVID response, and from what I understand, you could have goes back several times and have, so they may be out a month and only have, so you couldn't use sick leave bank for that?
And again, I
And
don't
not
want to say
unless
yes, I want to look
unless
at
it's
case.
catastrophic.
Yeah, let's look at it case by case. I'm not going to say that either. I just want to make sure that we review each one individually.
When we wrote the language, of course, we didn't have COVID around, but, when it was written. Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Anyone else? Okay, so before we adjourn, we do need to set a date for a meeting to
Ms. Bridges, go downstairs and post these 3 documents.
discuss potential change to calendar and to approve the guidelines.
And those will be the only
I
things?
know Mr. McCutcheon's going to be out of town through Sunday, so the first time that all 7 of us could be here would be Monday. Does Monday afternoon work? Monday 5 o'clock work for everyone?
The 27th.
And we have to wait 72 hours.
The 27th.
Which I really don't
That'll
want to be
work.
on the weekend.
Okay, so staff, it'll be, okay, the calendar is what we need to bring back, and these 3 documents.
When we're talking changes to the calendar, we're talking minor adjustment. We're not talking about start date or.
No. Well, anything could be on the table, but the main 2 things were,
Homecoming.
we're not have a fair day anymore, because there's no fair. So how do we want to adjust that? And then we got out for early release on homecoming. Well, homecoming's no
Well,
longer
it's
on
also
that
a
day.
parent conference day. The teachers work, but the kids didn't, so it'd be a parent conference day.
I'm more
And-
specifically talking about start date. We're not messing with that, right?
That's not my decision. That's the board's decision.
So, Mr. President, you're saying Monday, the 27th at 5 o'clock, a 2-item agenda, there will be no closed session.
Correct.
And when
Good
we
with that?
post it, there's no closed session, there is no closed session. And staff, well, I'll need you guys back, because in case the board would be bringing back questions from people who call them.
You can put closed session on there. Let's just not have anything on there unless it's just absolutely necessary.
You're not a gambling man.
Yeah, I am.
Okay, yes, sir. Done.
All right. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Kriegel, second by Ms. Timmerman. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Motion carries 5-0. Thank you.
I think overall, everybody.